After fully completing Hollow Knight Silksong and making my review, which you can see on the card on screen, I felt like I wasn't fully done with the game. This was my most anticipated game for years, and although I've made plenty videos on it, I promise this is the last one. Here I'm going to rank all of the bosses of Silksong on how I perceive the difficulty, meaning you may disagree down in the comments, but it's entirely my opinion. I'm also going to offer a tip or two for each boss along the way in case you're stuck on one, and I'll timestamp the video so you can just click to a certain boss that you want help with. I do slightly regret starting this video as my first ever boss ranking, as there's 44 entries in total. I'll give you the warning now, there are whole game spoilers throughout the video, so if you haven't finished it yet, why are you even watching? These boss fights are all from my second playthrough, so now I've had the chance to play through twice, this is a much more balanced view of which bosses are tough and which aren't. I'm also only counting bosses who have a name show up on screen, so enemies like the Cradle don't count. Without further delay, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and join me as I rank the bosses of Hollow Knight Silksong by difficulty. At number 44 and the easiest boss in the game in my opinion is the lone Moss Mother in Moss Grotto, a mandatory story boss at the start of the game. Rather than spend a lot of time on this one, let's just say it's clear this boss is meant to teach you the basics of boss fight combat with an extremely simple moveset and spawning slow moving adds to help you build up Silk. There's also a bench right beneath the boss room, meaning there is no run back. If you struggle to beat this boss, I have a feeling Silksong isn't the game for you. At number 43 is the Voltvyrm of Vault Nest, a hidden area atop the sands of Karak, which can be accessed by either some funky platforming in Act 2 or the Silksaw ability in Act 3. To be honest, it doesn't matter which act you take this boss on at, as it barely attacks you, and the only reason it's higher than the Moss Mother is because it does double damage. The hardest part of this boss is actually reaching it, as you have to navigate the electric beams to get there. Voltvyrm attacks by summoning lightning pillars across the arena, or in small circles that you can easily stand out of the way of. As the fight never ramps up or gets more difficult than making a line of circles on the floor, I don't really have any tips. Just use something like the Wanderer's Crest to burst him down and just move on. Number 42 is the Skull Tyrant, part of the terrible Tyrant wish in Bone Bottom. I'm including both the Marrow and Bone Bottom variants in this entry because their movesets are exactly the same. They charge, they jump, they call down rocks. Whilst this is a boss capable of doing 2 masks of health per hit, as long as you're confident in doing a pogo attack over his head, the majority of the damage he does will be mitigated, so you just need to figure out the tell for his jump and you can get some serious damage in before he can really hurt you. It is fun that he just charges through in Bone Bottom after you beat the counterpart during the quest, but given this is based on difficulty and not fun, Skull Tyrant is definitely in the lower ranks of difficulty. 41 is our good friend and valuable ally caught in a web of silk, the Bell Beast, who can be found in the Marrow as part of the main story. The Bell Beast's moveset is a lot like the Skull Tyrant, jumping and charging across the arena whilst also calling down bells from above. The main reason I've put them above the Skull Tyrant is due to how claustrophobic the arena is for the Bell Beast and how the bells they call down roll in one direction or another when they fall. On top of this, you have a lot less options in terms of upgrades when you fight the Bell Beast, meaning you're locked into what tools and upgrades you have at the time. With this being an early boss with few movement upgrades though, everything is well telegraphed and easily worked around, so we can free them from the threads and gain a valuable ally. At number 40 we have the dynamic duo of Old Codger and Cute Mount, Garmond and Zaza, an optional boss that can be found in Act 2. Annoyingly, this is the only boss fight in the game I couldn't get to trigger myself in my second playthrough because of how finicky it is. You need to talk to the duo at various points throughout Farloom and progress to Act 2, but not upgrade Songclave, and also beat the optional second Sentinel boss, which has its own huge list of things to do. I wouldn't mind all of these convoluted steps if the boss were actually any good or at all difficult, but all the duo does is what you've seen them do throughout the game. They charge back and forth and flail in the hopes of hitting you. They can be quite fast, but given the range of movement options you have near the end of Act 2, they just can't keep up with Hornet, and with such a short run back from Songclave, this boss falls firmly into the easy category, harder to actually unlock than they are to fight. The 39th spot on this list belongs to the poor soul left to watch over the Coral Tower forever, the Watcher at the Edge, an optional boss in the Sands of Karak region. I feel like this boss is super well hidden, and likely because he drops a memento for Hornet's Bell home, but he's far from difficult, especially if you've already completed the Coral Tower. The Watcher at the Edge can be woken up by playing your Needle in, but is essentially just a reskinned Karaka enemy with an extra swing on his moveset. The majority of the time he'll be diving up from the sand and doing his slam attack, which has a huge window to punish him for damage, and his moveset never really evolves. He does 2 masks of health per hit, but given how slow his jumps and lunges are, you have ample time to heal between hits. The vibes are immaculate in this fight, and he gives big guts energy, but unfortunately he just isn't that difficult. I'd say the hardest part is the run back, having to jump along all those thorns. In terms of tips, just stay away from him as best you can and it'll bait his jumping attack constantly, which means you can follow up with some damage and then dash away. Number 38 is Xylitol's Poor Assistant Zango, an optional boss found only in the Wormways in Act 3 after it has been taken over by the Plasmium infection. You can find Zango in Act 2 overcome by the Plasmium in a breakable wall in the corner of the Wormways, and you figure he's dead. Then when you return during Act 3, you'll find not only is he alive, but he's got HP that'd make Medea from Dark Souls 3 blush. What's weird is this is technically a puzzle boss, but you can beat him normally without doing what you're supposed to do. Zango walks around his small arena during the fight, never really attacking Hornet but ejecting Plasmium from his body, a lot like the new enemies you fight in order to reach the boss room. He does occasionally dash from left to right, but he's incredibly slow, so it's essentially just walking between the droplets and hitting him. The difficulty comes from if you don't know the trick to easily beating him, as he has the highest HP of any enemy or boss in the game if you don't do it, and whilst it is possible to kill him without doing it, it does take 10 minutes of straight damaging him with tools and needle. What you're actually supposed to do is get the advanced alchemy wish from Xylitol above, and then use the extractor file you get from him on Zango, but this comes with a trade-off. Yes, he's easier to kill and will die after 4 hits with it, but his movement and attack speed gets significantly faster as a trade-off. With him doing 2 masks of health per hit, this can easily stack up over time. The run back isn't too bad either, but this mountain of HP can be beaten by a sneaky tool and a bit of patience. And with a lack of offensive options, this is more of a side story moment than a boss. Palestag takes the number 37 spot for the most difficult Silksong boss, who can be found in the entirely optional memory area of Verdania next to Greymoor. Palestag is the perfect example of a boss that looks great, with some good build up, but ultimately the attacks it has let it down overall. You'll find the green print in the memory tracking the Palestag, and then following the clues you'll eventually come across it yourself and expect a good magic user type fight, but instead you'll get a basic boomerang boss. All Palestag does is teleport, fire boomerangs that are staggered, repeat. There's practically no challenge to this boss at all, the moveset never really evolves, but if you get out of rhythm the boomerangs can stack up and surprise you. The biggest drawback is the run back. With the fight being in a memory, you need to re-enter the memory and run all the way back to the fight every time, which can get annoying very fast, although you shouldn't really die here. In terms of tips, sitting in the water will avoid the large majority of the boomerangs with no movement required on your part at all. The Palestag also only spawns in set places, including the lily pad in the boss room, which you can actually move closer to the platform by swimming into it, allowing you to get an easy dash attack every time without having to jump over. A flashy boss with a lame moveset, Palestag could have been so much more. I love the vibes, but it's just too easy. Fourth Chorus smashes its way into Entry 36, a mandatory story boss in Farfields in Act 1 after acquiring the float ability. The Fourth Chorus is a beautiful boss, well designed in terms of its moveset and perfectly placed in the game for the abilities you have, but given this is a ranking based on difficulty, it's nothing we haven't seen before. The Fourth Chorus is a 4-armed automaton and uses these arms to full effect, slamming down on the platforms to reduce the area you can stand on and swiping across the platform to try and knock you into the lava. After the first stagger, Fourth Chorus will start hitting the ceiling with his other arms to drop rocks on you from above. After the second stagger, you'll find air fence on either side of the boss, and this is to encourage the use of the float ability you just unlocked, as if you float up to the top you'll find glowing rocks you can strike that act as an instant win button, crushing the robot when it drops. The run back on this boss isn't too bad, and in terms of tips, my only real one is to dash over the sweeps rather than float so you can get more hits on the Fourth Chorus's head. On top of this, use the air vents as soon as they show up to end the fight as soon as possible. Whilst you can still hurt the boss via the head, you may as well skip that out and go straight for the rocks at the top. An incredible boss quality wise, but the Fourth Chorus is an early story boss still lacking in challenge. The only boss on this list to have separate entries for each of her fights, the child of Grandmother Silk, Lace, takes entry 35. This entry is specifically her early mandatory story fight in order to leave the Deep Docks area in Act 1. You fight Lace 3 times throughout Silksong, and by far the easiest version of this is the Deep Docks one. She has the basic combo attack, dive attack, and the counter move that'll shred your health if you set it off and don't immediately get out of the way. She does get an ultimate move telegraphed by a big circle in the middle of the arena, where you'll be ripped to pieces if you go into it, but there's such a delay on it, it's fairly hard to actually get hit. Lyssa's biggest weakness in her first fight is aerial moves, meaning you can pogo off her and jump over the majority of her attacks and avoid damage. If you know the counter jab attack is going to happen, you can simply jump and avoid it. A very fun and cinematic fight. The first encounter with Lace will only be built upon in the future, but for Act 1, it's just a bit basic. Building on the easiest boss on this list by simply adding another one, the Mossmother duo takes entry number 34 on the hardest bosses in Silksong. This boss is fought in Weave Nest Atlas, an optional boss in an optional area. The difficulty hasn't really changed much for the solo Mossmother fight that the fight begins with, as the moveset stays the same, swooping across the arena and summoning smaller moss enemies for you to build Silk off of. This all changes when you end up with another Mossmother being summoned halfway through the fight. The second Mossmother doesn't really change that much, but this is the first duo or gang fight on this list, and by extension this is the easiest of them. The smaller moss minions are still being summoned by both mothers though, meaning that at times there can be a lot going on screen, but if you keep track of which Mossmother was the original one from the start of the fight and focus it, you can quickly make it back to just a solo fight, then you're on easy street. A fun duo fight that definitely needed a new moveset. Yet another duo fight takes the 33rd slot of the ranking with the Conchflies, a somewhat optional boss if you're not going to Act 3 that can be found on the Blasted Steppes. Another very basic duo fight, this one removes the ads found in the Mossmother duo and instead gets you with red cones of death, which the Drizzt enemies prepare you for prior to the boss. This duo tunnels left, right, up and down throughout the arena, with one stopping every now and then to fire cones at you that bounce all over the arena, often ricocheting to exactly where you need to be to jump out of the way of a drill attack. Everything here hits you for 2 masks of health as well, so you need to keep on your toes. Again, the run back isn't too bad after some wall jumps, you just need to make sure the little Drizzt enemies don't catch you with a stray cone on your trip back. As for tips, don't stand in front of the mouth of the Conchfly as they're about to fire a cone. It sounds like common sense, but they always fire at a 45-degree angle, so if you're under them or a few steps back, the cones will always miss. It's also worth noting you can hit the cone to make it damage the bosses, but it also negates any damage to you if it bounces back around to you after you've hit it. Interestingly, the fight stops after you beat one of the pair of this fight. I do wonder why. Another entry, another optional boss hidden behind convoluted criteria, this hard to trigger boss is the Crawfather, and takes entry 32 on the ranking. Currently the believed method to trigger this boss fight is to complete the Crawl combat arena in Greymoor, then in Act 3, complete the journal entries for all the new versions of Craw enemies draped in black robes. Once you've done this and rest at a bench in an area adjoining Greymoor, you should receive the Crawl summons, an item that lets you access the basement of the building in Crawl Lake. This is the first of unfortunately many arena bosses in Silksong on this ranking, and asks you to fight multiple waves of enemies before the Crawfather even shows up in the fight. The Crawfather himself has only a few attacks, a triple peck straight forward, a dive bomb attack, and summoning more minions to the arena. After enough damage, you'll start to sprout chains that take up space in the arena and restrict your ability to dodge the smaller enemies that he summons. Again, the runback is nothing to shout about here, but it is worth noting you need to fight the entire arena again every time you fail. Although he isn't particularly hard boss, it's RNG what enemies he summons, so you can have a particularly easy fight or a slog with a lot of annoying enemies. Despite the fact he's a bird, the Crawfather spends a large amount of time on the floor, so he's extremely weak to floor-based tools if you get overwhelmed and want to burst him down with a ton of damage. I'd also recommend taking out the big round bird enemies whenever they spawn, as their chip damage from projectiles can make the fight very short if you're not careful. A fun boss with some great lore wherein the birds blame you for their misfortune. Just a shame this isn't the last of the forced arena bosses on this list. Gurr the Hunter takes number 31 on this list as the most easy to predict Master Hunter of Farloom, and is found as part of the hidden Hunter Wish in Farfield during Act 3. This boss is again a case of a lot of building up for very little payoff. As you track your way through Farfield, you'll find more and more traps laid by the expert Outcast and Gurr. Reaching the final tracking node, you'll be trapped in a makeshift prison cell, then plummeted to the arena below where you'll have to fight your way out before Gurr gets to you. The fight itself at first seems frenetic and fast, and whilst it certainly can be oppressive, it's definitely not a difficult fight if you take your time. All Gurr does is dive out of the ground, throw some spike traps that expand out, dive back in, and occasionally dash across the arena floor. This means that as long as you keep track of where he's appearing and where he's going, he's a piece of cake as the traps are static once they're in place. My tip for this boss is that whenever he's about to emerge, you can see the dust coming out of the ground that shows the direction he's going to jump, and after that he throws his traps. He always jumps straight down beneath him. So the easiest thing to do is to get out of the way of the dive, stand underneath him as he throws his traps, then move after the third trap gets thrown. You can even get a cheeky hit on him as he dives back in, meaning the only real threatening attack is the dash across the arena, which is fairly easily jumped over. Once I realised this, Gurr became more of a pushover than a lot of the Silksong bosses, but as he does double damage and can be overwhelming until you learn his behaviour, he's the top of the first quarter of boss fights. Possibly my favourite fight in the entire game, number 30 in today's list is the Cogwork Dancers, a mandatory story boss in Act 2 found in the clockwork core of the Citadel. If this were a top bosses by design, vibes or fun, literally any other metric than difficulty, this boss would be at the top, or at very least close to it. However, when it comes to difficulty, the Cogwork Dancers aren't hard for the simple fact they tell you what they're going to do before they do it, so if you get hit, it's your own fault. After getting wound up in the gears, these two robotic lovers will show a line of light indicating where they're going to move next, and they'll slash in a larger arc than you'd think before moving on. They have two other moves which can put you in serious danger aside from this, one where they draw lines across the screen, and if you're on one when they whiz past you take serious damage, and one where they move into the centre of the arena and perform a frenzy dance, hurting anything caught up in it. After the first stagger, the bosses wind themselves up again, but this time they fight out of sync, causing you to keep track of both individually and figure out where the safe spots are. Following the second stagger, they wind up again, attacking even faster than before. As the moveset never really evolves and they telegraph every move, it makes this boss fight pretty straightforward, the main difficulty being when they're faster and out of sync in phase 3. When you defeat one of the dancers, the other will be left by themselves to fight you, but back to their slow phase, meaning the final part of the fight is not only easy, but really sad and frankly moving. I've not really got any tips for this fight. They tell you where they're going to go ahead of time, so it's on you if they beat you. I'll keep it brief for this entry as number 29 is essentially the same fight as the Cogwork Dancers with a twist. I'm talking of course about the Clover Dancers in the memory of Verdania, an optional boss in Act 3. In a clever twist, only the surviving Green Prince can actually be damaged, meaning there'll often be times where you're just repositioning for the sake of it because you're right next to the Ghost Dancer. There is no real change in moveset, hence why these two bosses are together in the ranking, but they do have one extra attack, in which they join together in the middle and send a sweeping whirlwind around the arena, meaning you have to jump and clawline over the top to avoid damage. The main drawback to this boss is the smaller arena and faster movements of the bosses, but given you can only damage one of them, to me, the difficulty feels about the same. The run back with it being a memory area is definitely a pain, as even with shortcuts it's a good few minutes trek back through Verdania to get to the boss. Not as impactful as the Cogwork Dancers and mechanically not evolved enough to warrant a higher difficulty, this is a lore heavy entry that doesn't offer a lot of challenge, but is a great boss nonetheless. Another duo fight, but one of my personal favourites, rank number 28 goes to the Forebrothers Signis and Gron, a sort of optional boss found in the Deep Docks during Act 2, but mandatory to reach the Abyss on Act 3. To begin with, you'll be trapped with lava either side versus Signis, who wields a dual flame shovel with some real finesse. That being said, he only really has two attacks, a melee combo and a move where he throws it out like a discus that has a fairly short range all things considered. This is also another fight which spawns normal enemies during the fight, which can be tough to deal with whilst avoiding the boss's attacks. Halfway through you'll be met by the other forebrother, Gron. Gron's moveset also only consists of two moves, jumping and throwing his shovel and a slamming attack. These two attacks gain explosive auras the further you get into the fight, but the extra enemies will stop spawning in after you've killed them all, so it's key to focus on them first. Given the two bosses have somewhat complementary but basic movesets of just two attacks, it's very easy to dodge and get amongst them without taking too much damage. When one of them falls, the lava will start falling from the middle of the arena too, but by this point it's a one-on-one fight with an enemy with two moves. You won't struggle. In terms of tips, the Magma Bell charm is a must, which you can get from the Forge Daughter to lower fire damage to 1 mask of health per hit, and make sure you stay away from Signis as much as possible to bait out his boomerang attack. This makes the moves of Gron much easier to avoid as well. Often they'll stack up on each other, which is where you should get the most of your damage in on both of them, and it definitely works in your favour. A very fun fight that's mechanically too simple to be difficult. These four brothers are firmly in the middle of the pack. The Guardian of the Wall Jump ability, Sister Splinter takes spot number 27 for the most difficult boss in Silksong, found in Shellwood, and is technically an optional boss for the story if you do some sequence breaking. One of the bosses that was nerfed in the original patch for the game, I think Sister Splinter is very much a middle of the pack boss, so I'm not sure why Team Cherry did that. She only really has one attack, her Claw Slam, which is heavily telegraphed and easy to dodge. She does call thorns down from the ceiling, but these can be taken out using one of your silk skills or tools, or 3 hits of your needle. She does spawn in some heavy damage dealing enemies, but if you focus on them before the boss, they should never overwhelm you. The main difficulty for Sister Splinter comes from her ability to shrink the arena with her thorns, which is why my tip for the boss is to save your silk for destroying these roots as soon as they show up. This makes the fight significantly easier, and you have more room to fight the flying enemies and dodge the Sister's claw swipes. The run back for this one is mainly an elevator ride away, so not too bad on the grand scheme of things. I personally think this is a great boss and well designed for early game, but it didn't need a nerf. At number 26, we have the second Sentinel, an optional boss of Act 2 that can be found in the High Halls as part of the final audience wish. This boss takes a long time to trigger, as you need to find the 3 pieces of the Cogwork heart across the Citadel by doing bell puzzles, then assemble them into the second Sentinel, who is hidden in the Cogwork core area. After this, you'll find them in various places throughout the Citadel fighting enemies. If you help them out 3 times, you'll cause the final audience wish to appear in Songclave. Follow the clues and you'll meet the second Sentinel, who aims to test you in combat, and honestly, there really isn't much to this boss again. They have a multi-thrust move that's easy to pogo over, a jumping lunge and a beam attack where they slash a projectile at you. On top of this, the second Sentinel has a charge dart where they glow white, then release a cross attack with their scissors. This attack will wreck your health if you're caught in it, but with it being such a small arena, it can be hard to avoid. Second Sentinel is again not that difficult, and just your standard sword wielding enemy, with the main bulk of the difficulty coming from the fact that the arena you fight them in is tiny. In terms of tips, when you see the second Sentinel charge an attack, if you time it within a second of them reaching you and then attack, you can parry their most powerful move, negating the whole thing. Second Sentinel is another example of a boss that takes longer to unlock the fight than it does to finish it, and firmly belongs in the middle of the pack. Found on the Blasted Steps as part of the Hero's Call wish in Act 3, Lost Garmond takes spot number 25 on the ranking. Again, another convoluted unlock method for this boss fight that sees half of our dynamic duo Garmond and Zaza get corrupted by the Abyss. This is where I'll remind you that this list is entirely subjective and my personal picks, because I really found this fight more difficult than I believe most would. It's more or less the same moveset as the NPC duel you can do with the pair, but with Garmond on foot, meaning it's slower. To balance this out, he has the same Abyss corruption moves you've seen a million times throughout Act 3, the Whippy Tentacle, the Abyss shots, and the bubbles that make the tentacles appear on the floor. There's something about this large move pool and the speed at which Garmond pulls out the attacks that really had me on the ropes, and I honestly couldn't tell you why. The runback is thankfully incredibly short. A great tip here is when Garmond starts charging the Abyss shot, jump over and pogo on him for a huge amount of free damage. As long as you disengage fast enough, he'll not be able to do a move that can actually hit you. Whilst by no means a really difficult boss, Lost Garmond is a really sad fight that hits you in the feels as he rests with Zaza after you beat him. Just don't play the needle in to hear what Zaza says after. I'm not crying. You are. Time for maybe a controversial pick as I place the thick booty of Disgraced Chef Lugoli at number 24. One of the bosses required to get an ingredient for the gourmand wish, Disgraced Chef Lugoli can be found tucked away in a corner of Sinner's Road during Act 2 and requires a fade-down cloak to access the fight. To begin the fight, you'll need to ring the gong in the kitchen. From there, the 2 sous chefs will attempt to carve you up before the main course of the boss fight. These bugs only have one move, so simply stand under them to avoid all damage and take them out. This thick chef only has a few attacks, booty bouncing at you across the arena and using their ladle, wherein the difficulty of this fight lies. You see, when using the ladle, Chef Lugoli throws maggots across the arena. Only 2 to begin with, but if you're hit, you'll be afflicted with the maggots, meaning you have to heal before you can get rid of them. After the first stagger, Lugoli will dive into the grate in the floor, causing 4 maggots to come up instead of 2, and they bounce off of nearby walls. Honestly, once you get the maggot trajectories down, this boss is a piece of cake. But until then, you'll find yourself dodging through the maggots, trying to get back to this sickening fight. Something I didn't know was if you leave this fight until Act 3, Lugoli will be boosted by the Void, giving them more HP and a tendril attack that they don't have if you fight them during Act 2. My only real tip for Lugoli is to learn the way the maggots fire out of the ground with each move, as once you get that down you're golden, but it can be easier said than done. Next is the Lord of the Coral Tower himself, Crust King Khann, who can be found in the Coral Tower via a memory area present in the Sands of Karak in Act 3. This boss has so much build-up and lore about being someone you simply don't mess with, and it's such a shame in the end, getting to him is actually harder than fighting him. C to reach the king, you need to climb the tower, meaning you need to do 4 arena gauntlets of enemies before taking him on. All of these arenas feature never before seen enemies and mechanics alongside coral sprouting from the floor to damage you. Once you reach the top, you luckily do unlock a shortcut, but no matter what, if you fall to the boss, you'll need to fight one whole arena all over again every single time you want to face him. I'd say this is possibly one of the most egregious runbacks in the game purely for this reason, but let's get on to the boss. The Crust King himself is actually pretty easy once you figure out where he lands. Much like the fight with Gurr, the king jumps all over the arena whilst throwing coral spikes at you. Again, like Gurr, the dust indicates which direction the attack's going to go in, so you're free to jump out of the way. The main problem is how inconsistent his jumps are, which can often result in 2 masks of pointless contact damage. After you've staggered him the first time, he'll start sprouting coral from the floor, but given this is denoted with dust clouds too, you can get near him and get a lot of damage in while he just stands there. I strongly recommend pogoing him during his horizontal coral attack too, for free damage. The second stagger has the king now call down spikes from the ceiling as well as all the other attacks in his arsenal, which is where the difficulty ramps up. There's a lot on screen to keep track of, and it's really easy to get swept up in it all, especially when trying to avoid his random jumps. This probably comes as a shock to no one, but I'd rather have a harder boss and no arena before him to make him feel more impactful, more like an imposing king of a warrior society that controlled the very coral itself. Such a shame that we got this. The Queen of Grey Gross Things, the Broodmother of the Slab, takes rank 22 in the most difficult Silksong bosses, accessible in Act 2 via the Grand Hunt Wish in Songclave. The Broodmother is the creature responsible for spawning the jailers you can find in the prison of the Citadel, and once you manage to find her, you're faced with yet another arena of enemies before you can fight the boss. The arena isn't too bad and mainly consists of little flies that just get in the way, but then you meet the mother themselves. This boss is only difficult due to one mechanic, the grey globs of spit she sends out on a regular basis that makes you stuck. You'll have seen this move before from the tall flies in the slab, but this time it's in a much smaller arena, so it's almost guaranteed to get you at least once. Aside from this, the Broodmother will jump from one side of the arena to the other to slap Hornet about, and summon in little flies just to add a bit more annoyance to proceedings. After the first stagger, the Broodmother will crack out a very familiar move to fans of the original Hollow Knight, where she slams her way from floor to ceiling from side to side to try and hit you. Honestly, for this one I don't really have any tips, just try not to get stuck in the glue and make sure you take down any of the little flies that get summoned before they become a problem. This isn't a hard boss, they just have a very cheap gimmick to try and kill you. Ah yes, the Pinstress. At number 21 we're about halfway through this mammoth of a boss ranking, and the Pinstress is unfortunately a mix of the primal aspid from Hollow Knight and the second Sentinel boss we talked about earlier, found in Mount Frey as part of the Fatal Resolve Wish, wherein the Pinstress wants a duel to the death. The Pinstress has a fairly simple moveset. It just so happens she has one of the worst moves invented, the 3-prong attack, which she sends out pins for. Aside from this, she floats around the arena before landing and charging from side to side. After her first stagger, she'll start using a pin art which is the same as the X-shaped slash the second Sentinel has. This boss isn't particularly difficult to hit, and a lot of aerial tools will easily take her down, but my suggestion for needle damage is to just pogo over her whenever she dashes from side to side and parrying the X attack the same way you can with the second Sentinel. You can try and stay under her to avoid the thrown pins, or you can try and hit them away with your needle, but given how awkward the spread is, just prepare to take damage. To avoid having to climb the mountain every time you fight her, I recommend going to the hidden bench just below where you unlock the Fade Down Cloak. This means you can jump straight off to the fight below should you be bested by her. A fine fight that I don't really rate in terms of fun or difficulty, the Pinstress just left me whelmed. Finally we're on to what I consider not only to be the more difficult fights, but by far the more fun ones to do. Whilst the Cogwork Dancers are some of my favourite, from spot 20 onwards is where you can see the diamonds amongst the rough, though not all of them are great, just difficult. Let's start with Phantom, a boss you can technically fight all the way in Act 1, but you're more likely to come across in Act 2, and the difficulty will vary massively based on this. Via a back alley in Sinner's Road or via the horrendous Bilewater, you can find the Mist, and once you've gotten through here, you'll be met by a steam organ deep in the swamp. Herein lies the Phantom, another child of Grandmother Silk like Laces, and she knows her way around a long pin. Straight out of the gate, Phantom starts with more moves than most of the bosses ever get by the end of their fight. This reminds me a lot of Hornet herself in the original Hollow Knight, with Phantom throwing her long pin towards you then dashing towards it. She also has a 3-hit jab attack and a counter move, whereby if you hit her during the counter window, she'll rapidly dash back and forth for 3 masks worth of damage. She's also capable of performing a slam from above with a white area denoting where her area of impact is. After you get her health down, shield and rage, causing her to do 5 slam attacks in a row before going back to her usual aggressive moveset. The main thing to be aware of in this fight is the fact Phantom teleports around, meaning she can often overlap with either where you are or where you're going for what feels like a bit of cheap contact damage at times. At the end of the fight, you'll be prompted to press the Silk skill button for an epic finish. If you fail to press this button, you'll not only take damage, but Phantom will gain health and you'll have to fight her some more. For tips, my main suggestion is to intentionally clash with the parry move, then use that follow-up dash attack to pogo on Phantom for a lot of free damage. Dash attacks are also your friend during any slam attacks. Possibly one of the best bosses in the game that you can fight and multiple points to affect the difficulty, I love the fight with Phantom. It's just not what I'd consider to be super difficult. The Father of Flame takes slot number 19, who can be found in the entirely optional area of the Wisp Thicket during Act 2. This might be a controversial pick to put so high, but this boss on my first playthrough of the game was a nightmare of a fight, mainly because I was using the Reaper Crest. On my second playthrough with the Wanderer Crest, I still only made it out of the fight with 1 HP, although I stupidly forgot to equip the right tools. The Father of Flame is essentially a massive Wicker Man who releases wisps from the 4 lanterns it has, 1 on each arm. By this point you'll have traversed the thicket, meaning that you'll know how to dodge wisps and also that they each do 2 masks of damage. The first thing you need to realise is how to actually damage the boss, which is to smash each lantern by double jumping and pogoing around the arena, which you can't jump off the wall of. Once you've destroyed the 4 arms, the cover of the central heart will drop off, spawning multiple wisps at a time before doing a King Grim-esque fireball dance and rotating between the 2 attacks. Luckily, dodging the fireball wave is fairly easy, as long as you're not greedy and try to deal damage during this window. Then eventually the core will fall and attempt to gotcha self-destruct to try and wipe you out at the end of the fight, something not unique to the Father. You're probably thinking, well, where does the difficulty come from? This boss is essentially precision platforming whilst dodging homing missiles that do double damage. And on top of this, because the Father of Flame isn't actually alive, you cannot gain Silk during the fight, meaning you can't heal unless you come prepared with Silk or the reserve bind tool. You can definitely mitigate the damage using the Magma Bell, like with any fire-based boss, but this is designed really to test your aerial combat skills above all else. A tough ode to the Wicker Man that can definitely be surmounted, the Father of Flame is an interesting design that just ends up a pain to fight. At number 18 is the flamboyant menace himself, Trobbio, who can be found on the Great Stage in Act 2. This boss is another fantastic fight in Silksong, with the biggest strength he has being in how random all of his attacks seem, whilst also allowing ample opportunities to get some damage in. Trobbio starts the fight with a lot of flair as he enters the stage, entering and exiting via various trapdoors. From here he'll jump out and throw exploding bombs that create a line of damaging smoke, a bit like a Bomberman bomb. He'll also spin himself up into a whirlwind, moving from side to side in the arena before abruptly stopping and sending out mini tornadoes either side of him. The key thing about this attack being to punish players who are in the air to avoid his ground attack. On top of all of this, Trobbio also summons fireworks around the arena, generating a massive amount of damaging area and only leaving a few pockets of safe space. After a couple of staggers, he'll enrage, doing all of the above faster whilst also conjuring smoke plumes from the floor to damage you between his regular moveset. You really need to move fast in this second phase to even get a hit in on him, which the Wanderer's Crest can definitely help you with. You might also find a lot of benefit in area-based tools like pins or spikes to make sure he's getting damage regardless of where he jumps around. For a real tip, make sure you pogo his whirlwind attack and position yourself directly above him. This makes the mini tornadoes miss you completely. A fantastic boss through and through, Trobbio is great, but he's not the hardest boss Silksong has to offer. Now this is a boss designed to show off a power level. An honestly pathetic showing in Deep Docks, Lace returns at number 17 in her second mandatory story fight in the Cradle at the end of Act 2. Here Lace has her exact same moveset as she does in the Deep Docks, only this time not only is she faster, but she has 2 new moves that negate her biggest weakness, Hornet simply jumping over her attacks. Whilst you can still pogo a lot of damage to Lace in this fight, her 2 new moves are an upwards double slash and a change to her counter move. Now as you hit her when she readies for a counter, Lace will either attack in front as she did in Deep Docks, or she'll jump into the air at a 45-degree angle, meaning if you jump over a counter as you learned in the first fight, you're going to get punished. This fight is fast and frenetic in all the best ways. It doesn't feel cheap or too difficult as it's building on a moveset you already know. But if like me on my first playthrough you thought this second fight would be a breeze, well, you're in for a huge shock. Number 16 on my ranking of the hardest bosses in Silksong falls to the final story boss of Act 2 and the cause of all of the issues in Farloom, Grandmother Silk. Now that we're in the upper echelons of difficulty, it goes without saying that every attack here does double damage, and Grandmother Silk comes out swinging. That being said, even though this is technically a final boss, I'd put her in the same ballpark as the Hollow Knight of the first game, in that she's a final boss, but she's clearly not the final boss. For those who have a lot of experience with the Radiance and Hollow Knight, you're going to find this fight particularly easy. I mean, there's an achievement for beating her without being able to heal, use tools or skills, so they couldn't make her that tough. The fight starts with her using her 6 pins to attack vertically and horizontally, as well as doing a claw swipe across the arena. After her first stagger, she'll also send silk threads across the screen, and if you touch one, she'll swipe at you for 3 masks of damage, so this move you want to avoid like the plague. After a while, she'll have a fake out death, before using her silk threads to start pulling boulders down on you, then summoning spikes, all whilst doing her pin and claw attacks. The ultimate silk attack is now 2 in a row, meaning you have to be even more precise with your positioning. My main tip, and honestly the reason I find her so easy, is she is incredibly weak to pogo attacks. You can almost spend the entire fight bouncing off her head, then when she dodges away, just claw line over to her and continue bouncing. You can even bounce off the pins or knock them out of alignment by doing this, meaning for the most part she can't even hit you, and if she does, you have more than enough silk to heal it off. It's a shame Grandmother Silk ended up being essentially a rehash of the Radiance, a great cinematic fight, but ultimately underwhelming in terms of difficulty. Another optional NPC duel, and a surprisingly tough one at that, our ally and mapmaker Shakra takes number 15 on the spot in the ranking, and can be fought during Act 2 after completing her questline. This is a fight I feel a lot of players don't even know is an option, at least on their first playthrough. Once you've completed the majority of Act 2, you never really have a reason to go to that area where the fleet caravan goes in Greymoor, but this is where you'll find the ring on the stake that summons Shakra for her duel. I want to preface on paper that her moveset isn't actually that tough, as she, like another tougher bug further up the list, went to the Captain America School of Combat, and that she spends the majority of the time throwing rings at you. She does do some power punches and some slams with an area of effect, but the main reason Shakra is difficult in my opinion is because of how much she teleports. Her teleporting gives very little window for you to actually hit her, and even with the Wanderer's Crest equipped, you can more or less get 1 hit per move, so you spend a lot of the time during the fight on the defensive, and with only 1 hit per Shakra's powerful attacks, it means you'll not often build up enough silk to heal through her onslaught, especially when she just teleports and throws a ring at you to interrupt it anyway. My tip for this fight is to try and use a tool like the Cogflies to try and get in some passive damage whilst you're otherwise engaged dodging and trying to get a singular hit in. If you combine this with the Polyp Pouch, you should be able to do some reasonable damage to Shakra's admittedly small health pool. Shakra's all-out attack will definitely keep you on your toes, but there's definitely more difficult bosses ahead. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what I personally found difficult in the game, and some of these you probably don't agree with, but I'd argue for where they are in the game, they are some tough bosses due to the lack of moves you personally have at the time of fighting them, on top of the fact you have no way to upgrade your damage output this early on. That being said, spot 14 goes to the spider causing the curse of Belheart, Widow, a mandatory story boss in Act 1. Widow starts off in a fairly slow battle, using her threads to call down bells at you and slashing across the screen, a hit which will do double damage if you're not careful. She'll also periodically run across the arena, pulling threads, which causes spikes to appear from the floor, meaning you'll need to jump and float to avoid them. After the first 2 stagger windows, Widow will enrage, and while she won't get any new moves, she makes up for it in raw speed and does significantly more damage during the fight, leading to where I find the majority of her difficulty comes from, the bells she throws. After becoming enraged, the sheer amount of bells she throws at you goes up so fast it's hard to find a safe space. As whilst there's a thread that tells you their trajectory, it simply isn't possible to avoid them all, and given the bells also bounce similar to the fight with the Bell Beast, even if you do dodge it, you are still able to get hit by them after the fact. I also feel like she pulls out the double damage attack a little too fast during this phase, meaning if you're right next to her trying to deal some damage of your own, you're immediately getting hit. My main tip for this boss is to save your tools and silk skills for Widow's enraged state, and then basically spam them as soon as she enters it. Because the first phase is such a relaxed pace by comparison, use that time to learn the bell trajectories and save up your silk to make sure you're full health prior to the enrage, then pray. A truly tough boss for where she is in the game, the Widow is a force of nature not to be messed with. Another boss who can make you suffer early on, so much so Team Cherry actually nerfed them. I am of course talking about the Guardian of Greymoor, the somewhat optional boss, Moorwing in Act 1. This is a strange boss to rank in terms of difficulty, because you can actually skip the early version of this fight like I did on my first playthrough. As it turns out, you can bypass the early versions of this fight by turning in the completed wish to find the fleas in the marrow. and then travelling with them to Greymoor, where they'll set up camp in the actual boss fight location. This means you might not fight Moorwing till much later in the game at another location in Greymoor, where you'll have a ton more upgrades and tools to make the fight easier. That being said, I'm rating this difficulty based on what I imagine most people do, forget about the fleas until later on in the game, and have to fight this winged menace whilst they have next to nothing to their name. You can have Garmond Zaza help you on this fight should you find them prior to finding Moorwing, but again, we're working on the assumption it's just Hornet here like I did in my second playthrough. Moorwing only has 4 attacks, with technically a 5th if you don't use common sense. They will lash out at you with their claws at a 45-degree angle, fire out spinning blades at the same angle, dive bomb you for double damage, or go upside down and fire out 2 blades that arc back around to hit you. This may seem like a simple moveset, and I suppose it is. The problem comes from the fact that, as you'd probably guessed, Moorwing is an entirely airborne boss, meaning you have to jump to hit them. This jumping will then put you in the firing line for literally every single attack they do, except for the spinning blades, which you need to be mindful of as you hit the floor. So at no point can you really be safe, as the air is covered and the ground is covered, always. I don't agree the boss should have been nerfed, as essentially what they did was reduce the blade damage to 1 mask instead of 2, but honestly it feels well balanced, just tough. If you have explored Greymoor and have certain tools like the 3-fold pin from Coral Lake, you'll find this boss goes down fairly easily once you get into the rhythm of it. What I think is a bit of a misleading thing is the fact you can get the Reaper Crest right before the fight, which sort of implies it's good for it. Whilst I love the Reaper Crest and use it throughout the whole game on my first playthrough, the nail damage doesn't change depending on what crest you have, so to use it over the Hunter's Crest in this fight actually puts you at a disadvantage in terms of DPS with how slowly it attacks. My tips for this boss is, for the love of God, do not stand under this boss. Whilst most attacks will come out at 45 degrees, the blades will hit you regardless, and when a dive bomb starts, you'll not have time to move out of the way. As for the staggers, Moorwing will fall out of the sky when you stagger it for an intentional double damage hit, and if you're underneath, guess who's tanking that hit? An early game boss who will certainly have you questioning whether this is the game for you. Moorwing is a balanced aerial menace that is difficult purely as it is airborne. Seems as it's been a while since we've had an annoying run back, let's talk about the Raging Conchfly for number 12, an optional boss fight found in Act 2 who gatekeeps the way to the Coral Tower. The other half to the duo Conchfly fight who ran away seething, this guy has a score to settle with you after killing their partner what's likely hours previously. The moveset of the fight is almost identical, with the Raging Conchfly sending out cones from its mouth and burrowing into the ground from all angles. The main difference here is that they summon regular Conchflies to help in the fight. They appear in a line and fire horizontally at you, then join in the fight coming from the top and bottom of the arena, whilst the Raging Conchfly still does its thing. The main difficulty of this fight is from the fact it's significantly faster than the duo fight, with it being only one of them, and the arena is tiny, meaning there isn't really any save times to heal at all. My tips here are again to stay away from the Conchfly's mouth when it's firing cones out, and to bring the Pin Pillow tool to deal with the mini Conchflies stacking up in a line, meaning not only is that move negated as they die instantly, but it also damages the Raging Conchfly itself. The runback is also annoying, even though you can unlock a shortcut to avoid that nightmare platforming section, because the alternative is coming up from the blasted steps bench beneath and having to do 67 wall jumps just to reach the top. Either way, it's definitely not a fun runback and just gets more frustrating the more you fail. An angry ex-partner through and through, the enraged Conchfly certainly had me enraged throughout our fight. Now it's time for the most infamous optional early game boss in all of Silksong, the Savage Beastfly. Found as early as Act 1 in the Hunter's March guarding the Beast Crest, then again in Farfields in Act 2 as part of the Savage Beastfly wish. This boss isn't just difficult for its early game location, but is difficult because it's a Hollow Knight boss in Silksong. What I mean is the way you're expected to move and fight would work really well with the Knight's moveset, but given Hornet moves entirely differently, it can be a struggle to overcome. The Savage Beastfly only has 2 moves in total, but one of them has to be possibly one of the most broken moves in the game. The first is the Slam Down, where they angle above you and then slam their face down into the floor. The second move is the Charge, where the Beastfly lines up wherever you are at the time, then charges to the other side of the arena. And the Charge is the move that's broken, mainly because of how thick this big boy is and the size of his hitbox. Essentially, because the Beastfly angles where you are at any given moment, they can be too high to jump over and too low to be comfortably under, meaning without a wall jump or double jump early game, it's actually impossible not to get hit if he starts charging as you're falling, which is likely to happen since you need to jump over the first charge. Sometimes it works in your favour after a pogo attack, but more often than not, he'll be in that sweet spot where you don't have the movement to avoid him. On top of this, the Chapel of the Beast version summons an incredible amount of smaller enemies as the fight goes on. and whilst you can use his downward smash to defeat most of them, if you get a horrible combination of air and ground plus the boss, it's likely you're going to get caught somewhere. The second fight in Act 2 is likely to be easier as you'll have more movement options to take them down, plus you'll have the magma belt to negate the lava damage and any other damage the fire spitting adds he spawns. The difference here is there's no walls to jump off of though, and the slam attack reduces your area to stand on as you fight him in the 4th chorus arena. For tips, capitalize on how slow the slam attack is and hit him every single time they do it. You can even position yourself to get a needle storm off and hit every time if you jump slightly as they hit the ground. The slam attack comes out slow enough that it's fairly easy to get hits on, and when fighting the Act 2 variant, equip a crest that lets you pogo easily and use the height in the arena to try and negate the charge move altogether. An extremely difficult fight early game that I suggest you come back to later, the Beastfly can only be described as savage. Finally, we reach the top 10 of the boss ranking, and where better to start than with the final story boss of Act 1 and a true test to see if you'll finish Silksong, the Last Judge, found at the very top of the Blasted Steps. Technically this boss is optional if you decide to take the route through the mist past the Phantom boss, but I'd say 99% of players will end up being judged, and what a great fight it is. The Judge is a huge bug with one of those flails that contain fire. She hurtles it at you with precision, then quickly snaps it back to get you on the return if you manage to jump over it. She also has a slam attack to jump on Hornet's head, and an attack where she whirls her flail about, creating an impenetrable circle of damage. After the first stagger, the Last Judge will gain new flame attacks, and these are the ones that often have a new player on the ropes. The flail throw now has an explosion after it lands, and the whirling attack now creates waves of fire you have to dodge through by making a note of where the ashes are prior to it igniting. The slam attack also now sends a stream of fire either side, opening up a great opportunity for pogo damage, and gains a dash, which will ignite pillars of flame across the arena. This gradual evolution of moveset is fantastic and very cinematic. It's also really difficult to get to grips with when a lot of the bosses up until now have only had a handful of moves that only got a bit faster with phase 2 rather than changing entirely. At a certain threshold, the Judge will move to the center of the arena and spin their flail for multiple turns, making you need to dodge a significant amount of waves before the fight starts up again. In terms of tips for this boss, use the Wanderer's Crest. The Judge spends a lot of time stood still after or before attacking, which means there's a lot of time to get quick hits in, and as the Wanderer's Crest is by far the fastest with no damage penalty, have at it. It's also worth noting that the Magma Belt tool makes the fire damage of the second phase significantly easier by reducing its damage output to 1 mask instead of 2, and at the end of the fight make sure you stay away from the boss as they also have that self-destruct mechanic that the Father of Flame has. The Last Judge truly does judge if you're capable of completing Silksong as a true test at the end of Act 1. At number 9 we have the optional boss that unlocks a very handy ability, the Bell Eater, which can be found the first time you call upon the Bell Beast during Act 3. Bell Eater is the perfect example of how Act 3 is a lot more oppressive and difficult as opposed to Acts 1 and 2. As the first time you finally reach your fast travel buddy, you're met with a boss who has zone defense down to a fine art. The Bell Eater is a huge centipede, like a much larger version of the Bell Beast, and the boss fight is significantly harder. Whilst this is the same sort of arena surrounded by the bells, the Bell Eater cuts off the left and right walls by making it its body, meaning if you go too close to the left or right hand side, you'll be swiped at with claws. Intermittently, either the Bell Eater's face or its butt will emerge from the bells. If it's the face, you have 2 attacks to encounter, either a flailing of limbs to stop you from attacking the side, or a spray of red goop to damage you. The way this works is, you expect the acid spray so you go to the side where it's actually a claw swipe, or you expect the claw swipe so you go to pogo on its head and receive acid to the face. It's a lose-lose situation. If you get the butt end, you can expect some pin pillow type bombs being farted out that do some serious damage if they hit you. After a set amount of damage, the Bell Eater will expand the arena by moving the sides outwards and then start tunneling across the top and bottom of the arena, with the top dropping bells similar to the Bell Beast fight. After this, both the head and the butt of the Bell Eater will come out at the same time on random points of the arena, meaning oftentimes the arena will be covered with projectiles and there'll be very little safe spaces for you to go. A fight ending with the Bell Beast coming back to save our skin, the Bell Eater is a tough introduction to Act 3 bosses. Another of my favourite bosses of Silksong, if not my actual favourite boss here at number 8, with the First Sinner, an optional boss found in the depths of the slab during Act 2. After you get the Fade Down Cloak, you can access this hidden prison above one of the cells by destroying the chains holding the door in place. Once you're in the room, it'll look like one of the standard bind to get an ability rooms until you wake the first sinner from their slumber. This fight is very reminiscent of the Pure Vessel from Hollow Knight, with the first sinner summoning pins that run across the horizontal and vertical planes. The first sinner will also teleport to a 45-degree angle to Hornet and do a double slash, and will sprint from one side of the arena to the other, very similar to the Widow fight. The first sinner will also call pins in a diagonal cross pattern amidst her numerous teleports. The difference here, other than the incredibly fast movement speed and teleporting, is the fact the first sinner can also heal in the exact same fashion as Hornet. And this is where you must get a hit off on her before she does so, otherwise the fight is going to last forever. After a few staggers it'll look like you've beaten the first sinner, but that's just her starting phase 2, where not only does she get faster, but she starts using the Rune Rage ability to create damaging circles in a random pattern around the arena on top of everything else that she does. This fight is pixel perfect in my opinion. The right level of speed for where you are in the game, the right level of damage on attacks, practically no downtime with the added pressure of her healing is just boss perfection. In terms of tips, I'd recommend using a crest that has a good dash attack, as this lets you do damage on her pretty consistently per teleport, rather than limiting it to attacking her during her own attacks. A really strong optional fight I wish there were more of. I only hope the DLC has way more fights like this one. This next entry is a perfect example that a boss's moveset isn't what makes it difficult. I am of course talking about the mandatory Act 3 boss of Bylewater, Gron the Great. This is possibly the most infamous frog you've ever witnessed in the Metroidvania genre. Not for his actual difficulty, as I believe his moveset to be pretty limited, as he only has 3 moves unless you count a dive. No, the difficulty of this boss comes from everything else about his location. For starters, this is the worst runback I've ever witnessed in any game hands down, and that's including the Dark Souls 2 DLC fight against the Blue Smelter Demon. With the Bloatfly enemies spawning randomly, the reliability of climbing the very tall room prior to this boss is nigh on impossible, and the long corridor to the village is filled with so many ambush enemies you're almost certain to take damage. Couple this with the fact the entire way there is surrounded by maggots, and you've got the potential to be seriously hindered before you even reach the boss room. Once you do get there, you'll be treated to yet another arena fight, complete with poison maggot pools, a giant swinging mace, and multiple ambush enemies, one of which you'll be witnessing for the first time during this fight. Once you've managed to successfully complete the arena, you'll finally meet Gron. Bear in mind, from bench to boss, you're looking at around 8 minutes in total. Yes, I timed it. Gron only really has 2 moves to begin with. He'll spit out green balls that bounce and explode, and he'll try to suck you into his mouth. Both of these attacks deal significant damage and can often cause you to fall into the maggots by trying to avoid them. Gron also dives into the swamp and out of it, which can cause you damage if you're not paying attention. Once you get him to about half health, he'll start using an extremely familiar attack to those who have played Hollow Knight. Gron starts shooting out soul projectiles, very similar to the spell the Knight has, which have a pretty deceptive hitbox. During this phase you'll also have ambush enemies summoned in for extra damage, and the mace will swing back and forth periodically just in case the boss wasn't enough for you to keep track of. The easiest and best tip for this horribly designed boss is to treat it like a zombie and go for the head. Wanderer's Crest and pogoing on top of Gron will have you avoid the large majority of damage, so you can dodge a suck attack, then jump off the wall and dash onto their head, bounce on it until they dive into the swamp, rinse and repeat. This also avoids the second phase soul projectiles too. In terms of tools, you can always go with the anti-maggot tool, but as that only works once, you might be better off not using it. If you use the Delver's Drill tool though, you'll be out of the range of damage by being on Gron's head, plus you'll do huge damage to the boss itself. Pin Pillow Bombs are almost a guaranteed hit too due to the size of the boss, and they do a ton of damage. The worst boss design in the game by far, with one of the worst runbacks in history, this horrible boss takes the top spot by virtue of the arena it exists in. Shrine Guardian Seth takes the number 6 spot for the toughest boss in Silksong, guarding the Shellwood Shrine, housing Nihilith in Act 3. He won't allow anyone to pass without a duel, and has long forgotten his actual purpose. This boss is yet another fantastic addition to the boss roster by Team Cherry. Designed by a fan who died of cancer prior to the game coming out, Team Cherry not only put this design into the game as a boss, it's an incredible boss fight and has a really touching quest after as a fantastic ode to this fan's life. Shrine Guardian Seth is very similar in a lot of ways to the Shakra duel in Act 2, in that Seth teleports around the arena a lot, and also went to the Captain America School of Combat in that he has a shield he frisbees around the arena for some almost unavoidable damage. Armed with a pin, he does have a variety of moves, although it's hard to know which are punishable. Seth's moveset can be best described as a mix of Shakra and Lace, as he has a standing slash attack and thrust attack similar to Lace, whilst having the projectile and teleporting ability of Shakra, alongside a slam which causes a circle of damage in an area. He also has an upwards double slash for people who think they're safe in the air. After a stagger, Seth will enrage, moving significantly faster but keeping the same moveset, with the exception of performing his slam attack 3 times in a row now instead of just once. In terms of tips, like with Shakra, do not use the Witch Crest here, as the teleporting will cause your heal to miss and end up with you being back at the bench. I'd recommend using the Wanderer's Crest just to make sure you get as many hits in as possible, as the longer the fight goes on, the more you're going to struggle. Seth is a great fight and a loving ode to a great person. I'm glad Team Cherry made this one of the best fights in the game. The emo version of the stage bug himself, Tormented Trobbio, takes spot number 5 on my ranking of the hardest bosses in Silksong, fought during Act 3 as part of the Pain, Anguish and Misery Wish obtained at Songclave. Tormented Trobbio is a strange one in terms of difficulty. As you'd likely tell from his over-the-top death animation during round 1, he has a mind for the theatrical, and this only amps up on his original moveset. Starting out with more or less the same moves, there are a few variations that nudge him higher in difficulty. Namely, he's even faster than before, and his whirlwind attack now leaves fireworks in its wake. His bombs now gain more range, and his firework summoning attack now includes beams that fire out of him, meaning you can't punish him as he conjures them like in the original fight. Once he gets to half health, Trobbio will again start sending flares blasting up through the floor, and although the dance remains the same, it gets infinitely more deadly. In terms of tips for this one, the use of tools like tacks or spikes will be a godsend. Grab as many zoning tools as you can and let Trobbio's flamboyant movement be his own downfall. A tormented bug that really puts you through your paces, the second round with this showy bug is not only a great fight, but it's tough as hell. I'm not sure how controversial this pick will be, as I've not seen this boss mentioned ever when it comes to difficulty, but my pick for the top 4 starts with the Unraveled, a hidden optional boss in the White Ward during Act 2. If you can double jump up to a certain corridor in the White Ward and then use the claw line to open a trash chute, you'll be treated to the key to the Unraveled boss fight on the other side of White Ward. This is another boss that relies on summoning enemies in order to wear you down, but for me the main difficulty of this boss comes from the hitbox it has and the fact it has an insane health pool. Whether you find it early on or not, this will be a long fight. The fight starts with a couple of Silk Abomination enemies before the lights turn on and you're treated to a fight with Silk-made form, the Unraveled. The Unraveled only starts with a few moves, a dash from one side to the other, and firing out 3 bodies at you, but it is hard to tell which they're going to do at any given moment. So if you try and head in for damage, you'll end up hurt. They can also dash at you after shooting out the bodies, so keep an eye out. The difficulty here is when you jump over the Unraveled, you'll not be able to hurt it via pogo due to its helmet, but then when you land on the other side, you can land on the very edge of its cloak, taking 2 masks of damage. This specific part of its hitbox is ridiculous for cheap damage, and it happens really often if you're not careful. After a while, more enemies will get summoned in to wear you down before the Unraveled starts summoning spears to try and impale you between its attacks. These spears work like needles sewing a stitch, showing you where they'll come out and then where they'll come back down again with a white light. As a rule, these are a piece of cake to dodge. The issue comes from dodging the boss itself while all of this is going on. The upside here is summoning these spears results in the Unraveled getting a move where it just appears out of the ground in the middle of the arena and just roars, where you can get a load of hits in. There'll be yet another wave of enemies to defeat, and then you're locked into Phase 3. The good news is Phase 3 has no new moves. The bad news is everything speeds up significantly. This results in an insane level of things to deal with, all while the Unraveled tanks the majority of your hits. After a long and exhausting fight, they will eventually be beaten. A nightmarish design for a nightmarish boss, the Unraveled will always live in my bad dreams as one of the toughest bosses in the game. An optional boss of Act 3 found deep in the Shellwood Shrine, Nihilith the Forest Spirit used to keep Shellwood safe, now she sits at 3rd place on this ranking. One of the 4 optional bosses for the Act 3 main story quest, Nihilith luckily has the smallest runback or bench to boss ratio of all of them, but the reason for this is because her boss fight is tough as nails. The main source of difficulty comes from the boss arena itself, as Nihilith removes the only platform you have in the fight about halfway through, and it only comes back if you fall into the spikes. When you do though, she'll often already be attacking again by the time you spawn in, meaning you're taking 3 masks of damage instead of just 2. Nihilith has 5 attacks in total, and never enrages or attacks faster, just changes the arena. She will periodically dash from one side to the other, making thorns appear on the side she's attached to, whilst making them disappear from the side she's no longer on. She performs an up-close flurry of melee attacks if you're too close, or she'll generate a radiant pollen attack that fills about 80% of the boss arena. She's also capable of throwing up 3 spiky thorn balls, or firing screen-filling bullet hell pollen that almost seems to track you as you desperately cling to the wall. So the main problem you face here is, how do you actually damage Nihilith, as she's so great at instantly repelling any melee attacks, the obvious answer here being that you don't. Naturally, tools are ridiculously overpowered anyway, but even more so in this fight, as things like the Silk Shot, the Pin Pillow, or the Cogflies can do huge amounts of damage whilst you just play defense with the Ascendant's Grip equipped for an infinite wall hang. You can also use the Reaper's Crest if you want to go full melee, as it'll keep you at arm's length from the majority of the attacks. Just don't forget you have the claw line to get out of the pollen attacks like I always do. It's also worth noting you can use the dash button to move up the wall should you need to, rather than actually wall jumping each time. This Garden deity is far from Garden variety, being the 3rd hardest boss in the game, in my personal opinion. We finally make it to the top 2. Where 2 behemoths dance and twirl for the top spot on my ranking, and for reasons I'll get into in a moment, the Scar Singer Carmelita takes number 2, an optional boss as part of Act 3 found in a memory in Farfields. This fight is truly incredible, the perfect balance of difficulty and that amazing feeling when you surmount it and come out on top. The one complaint and only complaint I have is that once again this is a Silksong boss with an arena fight prior to actually fighting the boss. And this boss is difficult enough that they really didn't need to wear us down or extend the fight to get here. Plus, aside from all of the annoying ant enemies, this fight introduces a brand new enemy type of ant that you have to fight 2 of at the same time, given they aren't tough, but it's such a bad move to expect you to learn new enemy types immediately before a very tough boss fight. Carmelita herself shows off her difficulty by constantly zoning out the map, a bit like Nihilith, only this time it's by dancing and twirling her blades around. Her attacks consist of a 3-hit slash moving across the majority of the arena, a spin attack covering the same distance, a spinning slam which generates spikes on the floor in front of her, jumping and throwing her twin blades in a crescent shape, and finally the toughest move to dodge, just straight throwing both blades at you. As the fight goes on, she will start to throw her blades multiple times per attack and begin to dash across the arena, summoning more bone spikes, all to an incredible soundtrack of her singing. The difficulty here comes in the relentless attacks Carmelita has. There's very little downtime considering how agile she is, and at no point can you consider it safe to heal. Crests like the Witch Crest struggle massively as she doesn't stay in one place long enough to be hit by the heal animation more than once. The main issue with this boss, for me at least, was the dual blade throw when she stood facing you, and I figured out the best way to dodge it. Wait until she starts the animation for the blade throw, jump a small jump, count 1 second in your head, then dodge towards her. This will dodge through all of the damage and give you the opportunity to attack her yourself. Again, with the broken nature of the Wanderer's Crest, this is a good bet to get a lot of damage fast. They should really think about nerfing the output this crest has. Possibly the best and most cinematic fight in the game, Carmelita shows us a dance of death very few are prepared for, and even fewer players make it out alive. Finally, after what I assume at the time of writing will be an hour of boss ranking, we finally reach the end of the longest video I've ever made. And who is at the top but none other than the final fight of the entire game, Lost Lace, found deep in the abyss at the end of Act 3. The culmination of 2 previous fights, Lost Lace is completely absorbed by the void, a husk of her former self with some now horrible abilities to go on top of her already solid moveset. The fight starts out very similar to the fight with Lace in the Cradle, utilising the exact same moveset as before but with 2 twists. 1, she can now use a void tentacle to lash at you, and 2, she can also now teleport through the dark void floor. All of her attacks and even contact damage count as void damage, meaning you will lose Silk whenever you take damage from her. Following the first stagger, the fight really steps up, as Lace gains all of the void powers you've seen the regular enemies have up until now, conjuring patches of tentacles on the floor, and conjuring 3 void blasts that home in on your location. If you manage to stagger her out of this onslaught, Grandmother Silk in the background of the arena will fall into the void water, causing whippy tentacle waves to fly back and forth across the arena, making you wall jump over them. Then, Phase 3 begins. Phase 3 has all of the moves of the previous 2 phases, plus now these waves of void sporadically swiping across the arena as you fight. Lace gains significantly more movement speed and will now teleport through the void after almost every single attack. You'll know you've almost ended the fight when Lace starts using her white circle attacks. Only now, where they used to be a punishable attack, instead you're treated to void tentacles should you try and attack her after she's used her ultimate move. The true difficulty of this fight honestly comes from the design of it. You have a black coloured floor with an all black boss attacking you with all black attacks and having black inky tentacles on the floor too that she can spawn out of. Visually, it's extremely confusing and you can often lose track of where Lace is, resulting in you taking unnecessary damage constantly. As things just get so busy on screen, you can't make out what's what. It's a shame because really this is a tough fight that I'd put in the same ballpark as Carmelita, but because of how noisy everything is, you just can't see what's going on and it gives her the edge on this boss ranking. A boss I feel like they're almost in the Radiance tier of difficulty but not quite. Lost Lace is a great boss that's hampered by messy visual design, but overall, it's still one of the best fights in the game and a great way to end Hollow Knight Silksong. And there you have my full list of Silksong bosses, minus of course the special mention Summon Savior, who can only be found on the Steel Soul mode. I value my mental health too much to tackle that, so I'm sorry. I hope you like this first ever boss ranking on the channel. If you want to see more of them, drop a like and a comment suggesting which game I should tackle next. As for the list itself, if you disagree with any of my ranks, shout it out down below and let's see if you can convince me I'm wrong. Either way, thank you so much for watching. If you want to speak to me directly, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.